Welcome back, everybody. So we are in person this time, live from the Holiday Inn. It's Sunday morning.
Yeah.
We're back for another edition of Hi-Fi Seminary. Just for you, maybe you didn't watch last week, but for this month of July, what we're doing is we're talking about albums and artists that we love, new and old. We're not reviewing the album, so if you want to review, go on the internet.
We're not sponsored.
We are, each of us, bringing some albums, some records that we love, that speak to us, and encouraging each other to listen to them. And hopefully you will do that to enjoy. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the album and focus mainly on a song that we think can actually communicates for us something about the truth of Jesus, about our faith. And this is actually a spiritual discipline that I see as of listening to art. Art has a way of speaking to us in a way that God can speak through that regardless of what the intent of the artist is. But so last week, Jay, he shared with us Johnny Swim, one of his albums that he's really loving. This week, we're talking about one that I love. It's called Palms. That's upside down. Yeah. Though it really doesn't. I mean, probably not going to. It's called Palms. It's by...
It looks vastly different when you put it upside right.
Let's see it. Flip it up.
Yes.
I need to see the other.
See, upside down, not upside down.
Whoa, that way makes more sense.
You sure it's not like diamond?
All right, jokers.
Okay.
This is by a band called Thrice. They're from Orange County, California. Now, Thrice is by far, if not my favorite band, one of my favorite bands. I've seen them about 5 or 6 times, and every time is an experience that I would categorize as life-changing.
All right, can you explain that?
Yeah.
The lights.
I love music. Music has a way of transcending all sorts of things, taking you kind of out of the moment, but also bringing you really present in the moment. You're very aware of things, and they create songs and music that does that. And seeing it happen in front of you live is just a crazy, cathartic, and I would say ecstatic experience.
Do they ever tell the audience why they wrote this song?
No, they don't. I've never had that experience with them. Though the lead vocalist, Dustin Kenstrew, on his Patreon will do song kind of, he'll discuss like song, he'll talk about what that kind of stuff himself on his own time. Mm-hmm. I've not, but you have to be a Patreon supporter, so you have to pay for that. But anyway, just a little bit of backstory on why I love this band. I got into them kind of just out of high school when they were making music that was more like an aggressive punk metal hybrid. I still love those records, but what has been really cool for me is just how they've evolved creatively and how they write songs as I've grown up as a person. And with each record, it's almost like they're like reading my mail for each phase of life. So that's a big reason why I love them. And they're just phenomenal musicians. They know their craft and they do it well, and they work really hard at it. But I really appreciate Dustin Kenstrew, the principal songwriter of the band. He's the vocalist. He plays guitar.
Yeah, I would say, because I'm pretty sure you're the one of the people who introduced me to Thrice, and it really was like, it wasn't a genre that I was listening to a whole lot at that moment, but it was his lyrics and the depth and really complicated things he was writing about, but doing it so poetically and in rhyme and meter and all that. It was just like, that is absolutely immensely impressive with people who can take such complicated and deep things and make it singable.
Yeah.
Like it's outstanding.
Yeah, well, and I mean, part of the reason why I probably identify with a lot of his lyrics is, he shares a similar story to me, a lot of us. He grew up in the church. He grew up wrestling with faith, and that's always really been present in the words that he has written for the band. In fact, actually, at one point, those of you who aren't familiar, like he was a worship director for the mega church network of Mars Hill, which unfortunately ended in major leadership scandal. And Dustin was actually one of the leaders to call out some of the abuses that were taking place by the lead pastor, Mark Driscoll. This is not the focus of our conversation today, though. It just gives a little bit of a backstory of who Dustin is and who the band is. So that's relevant because after that fallout, it's very clear that Dustin went into a time of disillusionment. It's evident in the record that came out after they were kind of on hiatus, called To Be Everywhere is to Be Nowhere, that disclosed that disillusionment experience. And moreover, with the shifting cultural landscape that has been taking place, especially in the United States, and of a certain presidential cycle, that was a breaking point for Dustin's identification with evangelicalism in particular. So this leads us to Palms. You guys had a chance to listen to it, their 10th album.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, I'm a big fan of it. I remember it was kind of cool to be able to sit down because, like, I think I listened to it probably when it first came out, maybe once or twice through, and I remember the Gray, like, well, jumping ahead where we're doing, but definitely one that really stuck out to me was just like one. I'll be honest, when I listen to music, I like the lyrics, but the groove or the rhythm and all that sort of, like, is the thing that draws me in first. And there's a great lick that runs through that song that just was like, this is great. And then it's just like built upon that. But it was great to sit there and listen to it, and especially with kind of what we're doing, to really listen to it and take time to really like look at the words. I don't know how many times you do that, and how many times, you know, when you're listening to a song, you realize the words you thought it wasn't actually the words that were said, and you've been singing it wrong. But like it's that was like it. I really enjoyed this record.
Well, and you speak about licks, like Dustin and Tepe, the other guitar player, they know how to write a guitar line.
Oh, absolutely.
They're just very talented, and they just create these they have a way of making something sound gritty and hard while being very ambient and even and epic kind of sounds. But the reason I love this record, because it kind of has, at the same kind of reasons, given a voice to my own faith and worldview change. Now that I'm in my 30s, I see a lot of myself in the record, the songs of this record.
I was going to say, if you understand what Dustin was going through, that's the lyrics speak of that.
Yeah.
And then therefore you find yourself in it.
And I mean, I can only speculate so much. Like, it's not like I sat down with Dustin, but I'm speculating based on what I know and what there's social media, there's interviews, there's all that kind of stuff. But this is based on what I know, and so I can really only speculate. But yeah, I think there has to be something like that in there. But with this album, for everyone else, like it has a theme of what I've been taught to call simplicity on the other side of complexity. Something where we're leaning into how messy life can be, and accepting it for what it is and not what we want it to be. My favorite songs, the opening track called Only Us. Yeah, it calls out the divided tenor of our time, highlighting and kind of contrasts how we have so much division, and highlights rather that we have a shared human experience that should really unite us. There's one line that says, "Finally, when will it be enough to find that there's no them, there's only us?"
I loved that line.
Yeah. And then there's the song Everything Belongs. And
just beautiful.
Yeah, a very beautiful song. I appreciate what this song is presenting, because it just causes me to think about being humble as a follower of Jesus. That I am not the one who ultimately decides who's in and who's out, but it's God who decides who's in their kingdom, and he did that through Jesus, and through Jesus is how we're brought into the kingdom, and it's not through a certain tradition, it's not through a certain doctrinal statement, all that kind of stuff. It makes me think of what C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity. We do not know that one person can be saved. We do know that no person can be saved except through Christ. What we do not know is that only those who know him can be saved by him. And whether you agree with that statement or not, I think what it does is just causes you to take a step back and remember that, hey, it's not me who makes these decisions.
Yeah, and that quote actually reminds me of a quote I've written in my phone because I really like it. It's actually by John Newton, so the person who actually wrote Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And it says, if I ever reach heaven, I expect to find 3 wonders there. First, to meet some I had not thought to see there. Second, to miss some that I had thought to meet there. And third, the greatest wonder of all, to find myself there.
Yeah.
I like that. I just sort of like, I'm not the one who makes the decision. And I think there is that wonder that just like, yeah, let's trust Jesus.
Yeah.
I really put these last 2 songs together. Everything belongs and only us. We're all human. We didn't.
Yeah.
I don't get to be God.
Well, it's just that broader theme, right? Also, another song I really like, it's just a good rock and roll anthem with a good message. Hold Up a Light. If you listen to that song, choose to, I want you to think about what the echoes of Jesus' words that you might find in any of his things that he taught in the Gospels. But the song that I really want to focus on today, and you guys have already mentioned it, that encapsulates what I think is the broader theme of the record, is The Gray. So again, it's very much a song that gives voice to my own experience. I feel as a Christian, as a human being, that's just the messiness of faith and really moving past strict fundamentalism. The chorus goes like this. And my hands are open, reaching out. I'm learning how to live with doubt. I'm learning how to lean into the gray. 'Cause I've had enough of black and white. I'll find another way and lean into the gray. I'll lean into the gray. I mean, that chorus is really enough just to kind of be like, yes, 100%. But a lot of the verses, kind of to bring the contrast in, talk about how we tend to try and fit everything about the complexity of life into neat little boxes. Yeah. Nice and tidy so that we can eliminate tension.
And feel safe. I think that's a big thing.
Safety, it's definitely about a safety thing. We want to feel safe. It's normal. That's that's a natural human desire.
I do have a sense of control when I kind of put things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the safety, like you said, I want everything to make sense to me. If it doesn't make sense, I will find a way to make it sense. But if I don't, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that's, it definitely a product of the time that we're in and just the times, the philosophies and ways of thinking that preceded our time. But, the reality is neat, tidy categories, when we're really honest with ourselves, when we look at the world, don't exist. And really, if we're wanting to just hold on to that, the truth is we're living in a delusion. And we can choose to be willfully ignorant. But and all that can create a lot of mental and emotional disturbances for us that we just really can't find rest in what life is, and ultimately rest in who Jesus is. I think when we do that, where we just spend all our time trying to put circle pegs into square holes, or square holes into circle pegs into square holes, whatever it be. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just as I was thinking through this a little bit, especially as you were sharing some of the stuff, in categories. Another way I feel like I've heard it in my life, especially in school, I heard a lot of this, it was embracing the mystery of God.
Right.
And it's the one thing that, like, understanding the writers of the Bible, like the ancient culture, they were really a lot better with mystery than we were. That we're trying to know a God that is ultimately completely, like, really kind of unknowable. Like, we can know a lot about him, but there's a lot more that we don't, that's just beyond us. And it is a lot of that. Just like when I hear that, it's learning how to embrace the mystery of God, and that he's also so much bigger than we really fully understand.
I was just going to add to that. I think about, like, we have at the fingertips the internet. At any given moment, if I don't know something, I will Google it, and it drives Nikki nuts. Because she'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, yeah, I want to know more. And I pull out my phone. And she's like, just watch the movie, Kyle. Just enjoy it.
Yeah. Well,
Who's that
because
actor?
I get that because I find that I'm the type of person who like wants to understand. And when I don't have that, it's just like I can't rest in it. It's just like, no, I got to figure this out now. Give me more time. I got to understand that, and be more understand. There's some stuff that I'm just not going to, and to start to be okay. And God, I'm not going to fully understand the fullness of God until I'm standing before Him, and then I'm not going to care,
Right.
Because this is going to be so awesome.
Right.
Anyway,
I was just thinking of the song "I Can Only Imagine," and I'm like, I want to know now. My imagination is so wild, but I also need to know everything.
I mean, that's natural. But I think the song really is, it helps me anyway. If you listen to it, maybe I'll do this too, but it helps me just like, it's impossible to make everything fit into the limits of our own perspectives.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. It's actually really freeing. Like the song talks about that, how freeing that is. Like he says at one point, now I can finally breathe. The truth is that black and white often is mixed, and much of life is actually gray. So bringing it to Jesus, the whole point of why we're here, is that he, being the all-knowing creator, he refused to reduce things to black and white. With a little bit of caveat, he was very black and white about who he was and his identity, but with everything else, he refused to like fall into the traps that everyone else around him was falling into. And again, speculation, but I think Dustin would really agree that Jesus wasn't that type of person. I mean, if you want to know more, you can listen to Thrice, and you can also listen to Dustin's solo work, which is also great too.
really good. Yeah.
But I have a case in point here. So in Luke 6, did you guys read it? Yeah. Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. He did a lot of healing. We all know this. And he often liked to do things like this on the Sabbath. Every time he does this, it's kind of like, here we go. Because you know the religious leaders are just waiting, ready to pounce. And they do, right? So it says they were watching Jesus closely, ready to accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. And Jesus says, knowing their thoughts, he said to the man with the deformed hand, like almost like just like, I know what's going on, guys, and I know what's gonna happen, but you know what? Here we go. Come and stand in front of everyone. He does it in front of all of them, and the man came forward, and then Jesus, before he does anything, before he really does the thing that's almost like I don't think he intends this, but seems like a slap in the face to the religious leaders. He presents his critics with a dilemma. I have a question for you. Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is it a day to save life or to destroy it? And he looks at them, and it isn't clear as if he's actually waiting for a response, because you kind of think he's asking that question because he knows what's going to happen. But seems more like he just wants to really present with them how small-minded and lacking they are in their faith, and he just simply heals the man. And he says at this, and it says at this, the enemies of Jesus were wild with rage and began to discuss what to do with him. I mean, you know how we talk about, lots of people will talk about the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. I think that's what Jesus was doing. And that is to give life. That was the whole point of the law in the first place with the Israelites. It was to give life to them as a people, as a nation, and that they would be a people and a nation that brought life to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and a lot of things that I was thinking of it as I was even thinking again through this song, through this, is sometimes how, and going to the categories thing, is sometimes when we build some of these categories, there's some good things in the initial of it. In some cases, like some of the idea of around the Sabbath was a lot of people sort of like asking the question, okay, we're not supposed to work, but what does that mean? And then saying like, well, let's do it this way. Let's say it means this. And instead of leaving it as like, this is how we're interpreting it, it became, almost moved to God said it. And therefore the category became bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when it became that idea of like, oh, you can't do work because of this, and it's just like, where like, would you, if you had a sheep that was in a hole, wouldn't you rescue it?
Yeah.
Is the question he poses at that point. Just like, okay, maybe we're holding on to certain categories in a way that it wasn't necessarily to be. And maybe there are times that was a good, helpful thing. But again, it's when we move those categories to make them the law, as opposed to helping us understand it a little bit, but not necessarily exactly what God said.
Well, yeah, and the word that translates law in the Hebrew is more teaching.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have a poor understanding of it ourselves because of the English translation and all that kind of stuff, and they did what they did with it and kind of mucked things up, which we would have done the same thing. Like, we do it all the time. We still do it. But it's just Jesus really wants people to understand, like, the whole point of what the law was to give life and not confine you to religious traditions that miss the point of the Word of God. I got another example, Luke 20. Let's see if you guys are familiar with this one. But Jesus was teaching in public, and again, his critics piped up and asked him, because of what he was teaching, they said, by what authority are you doing all these things? Who gave you the right? And being the clever teacher he was, Jesus decided to make a deal by asking them a question in exchange for answers. He says, did John's authority to baptize come from heaven, or was it merely human? Kind of a pickle he's put them in. They had to choose between admitting that John the Baptist, who they considered a heretic, was actually teaching the truth, or denying him as a prophetic voice and risk the wrath of the mob. But instead of humbly admitting the truth, their choice was to further repress it about say because they didn't want to really say that Jesus had divine authority in any way. So they just said, we don't know. Cop out right there. I imagine Jesus thinking, oh, so close. Because he probably, Jesus had a sense about what people were thinking, whether or not that's because he was divine or whether or not he was just a really, there's a whole argument about that, the kenosis theory. We're not going to get into that. Anyway.
Sidestep.
Yeah, but essentially, it seems like they just want to maintain their right view. They cannot see the truth because it will annihilate their neatly developed categories of belief.
Again, I think it's about boxing, putting something in a box, and they couldn't do that. And it drove them nuts.
So they opted for cognitive dissonance.
Much better.
Cognitive dissonance is when you have two conflicting thoughts. You have a belief, and then there's conflicting evidence. You just decide to adjust it in favor of your belief, just so you can maintain that, which we all do. I'm bad for it. But I've been this way. I've done this. We all do it. I've done this many times in my life. I'm very hard on the critics of Jesus. But the reality is, as a believer, as a follower, you really need to put yourself in the place of Jesus' critics when you read these stories. And instead of continuing to, like a willful ignorance, you need to admit that I need to have all my categories blown out of the water. Because you really want Jesus to reveal himself for himself. You want him to be revealed anew every time. And that's actually something that we need to be open to all the time. Because once we think we have it figured out, we've missed the point. C.S. Lewis, again, I'm a bit of a sycophant for C.S. Lewis.
It's a good quote. So.
He says, "My idea of God is not a divine idea." He says this in a grief
observed.
A grief observed. It has to be shattered time after time. He shatters it himself. He is the great iconoclast. Could we not almost say that this shattering is one of the marks of his presence? The incarnation is the supreme example. It leaves all previous ideas of the Messiah in ruins. It's true. And I think that's the way I know it's the way it needs to be. So with the gray, what it does for me, there's two things that this song, it gives me comfort and peace that the tension of faith that Jesus that the tension of faith is that Jesus remains Jesus, even though life is messy and doesn't fit my easily defined categories. And second, it shows me who I don't want to be, willfully ignorant and small-minded.
I catch myself sometimes when I go through crisis to imagine Jesus a certain way, and I'll say, why is Jesus not acting the way I thought he would? And that's when it comes to the shattering. I'm glad that God steps in, shatters my false image of him, and renews my spirit in such a profound way that I did not know a truth before, if that makes sense. And when it happens, it's heartbreaking because you expect God to act a certain way. And you're like, why aren't you doing this? This is who I thought you were. And he's like, so close, or maybe so far. And I'm so thankful when those moments happen, because then my faith, when it is restored, it's even stronger. Right?
Right. Yeah. That's that simplicity on the other side of complexity idea, is that you have simplicity, you enter complexity, and either you retreat to the simplicity you had, or you allow God to bring you through the complexity to the simplicity that you want, that you need.
Exactly, yeah.
It actually kind of reminds me of a book I read several years ago called My Imaginary Jesus. And it's an allegorical kind of story through the book where the author's made himself, fictionalized version of himself. And he talks about it, and basically in the story, he's got his imaginary Jesus. He's from Portland, so it's a hippie vegan Jesus.
There's a lot of those in Portland.
Yeah,
not Jesus, but hippies.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And then he runs into just like different kind of these versions of Jesus, and the whole thing is like Peter, somehow time travels to kind of him in Portland and chases, the hippie vegan Jesus away. And Peter's a rough man. And he sort of describes that of just like would make sense of a fisherman and in that time. And it's this sort of journey he takes with Peter, dispelling all these imaginary Jesus. And there's like the conservative Jesus, there's the liberal Jesus, there's there's all these sort of like throughout the whole thing. And coming right at the end, he gets to meet kind of this true Jesus, and it isn't as hardly defined. It's not as easily defined as those other meeting Jesus, though he talks about the love he's experienced in when he finally gets to really meet Jesus, and there was very much this difference, and the best way I feel, and I'm just using another C.S. Lewis kind of idea, is sort of the idea of how he describes Aslan, the God character. He's not a tame lion. Mm-hmm. And really just like that's the way he sort of just describes Jesus. It's like he's not necessarily as easy as defined as we'd like to define him. And I really like Gray, even understanding Jesus, is always leaning into that aspect. Is like this is not a tame lion.
Right.
This doesn't fit in some of the categories I have thought and would like to think, and he's going to do things that in a way that I'm not going to fully understand, and just leaning into that, because I really, after reading the book, I realized this is kind of maybe my imaginary Jesus, what he kind of looks like. A big thing for me was like getting caught up on the word love. And just sort of like it was more of a romanticized Jesus, as opposed to sometimes love means it's going to say a thing that you're not going to like. And it might even cause a little bit of pain.
Yeah.
But when you love someone, sometimes you've got to say the hard thing. And we might be a little mad at him. I was, like after he said it. But when you realize it's not just sort of like, he's not just dropping the hard thing and just said, okay, deal with yourself, bye-bye. Yeah. It's like, it's the hard thing and just like, but I'm here with you to walk. And it's because I think there's sometimes it's like God won't make me feel bad. And well, maybe sometimes he just needs to.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of this week. My district manager I've never met came into my store. I hope you're not watching this, Susan. She came into my store and she's like, "Oh, I've heard so much about you. Have you ever had someone say that to you?" And it like fills you with fear. And you're like, "What do you know? Who told you?"
Hope it's all good.
And then I think that's what sometimes like I wonder if I met like Jesus in person right now, and I'd be like, "That's not how I pictured it." Or like you have this image of who he exactly is. He's going to be this all the time, and then. Oh, I don't know. The imaginary Jesus, I want to be caught by surprise. I want to be surprised when I learn new things. I want to fall in love with Jesus more and more each day by learning these new things and not thinking I know everything. So when someone says that to me, I've heard so much about you, it fills me with fear. And I think if Jesus were to say, like, if I were to say to Jesus, "I've heard so much about you," he'd be like, "Oh, you don't know half of it." And I'd be like, "Yes, I'm okay with that." Am I off topic? No. Maybe. I don't know.
Actually, I think that just to kind of wrap this up and jump off both of what you guys have said, like you're highlighting what this song does for me, is that I often see myself when it comes to Jesus standing before a raging ocean. And it seems better to be left unventured. But Jesus is there. You might think of Peter walking on the water. And he's compelling me to embrace him in this scary and uncertain place. And the question I have for myself and for you guys to reflect on is, will I stay safe on the black and white shores that I like, that are easily to understand? Or will I jump in trusting that he will take me to the shores of his kingdom safe and better for the scars that great ocean has given me? And will I be willing to embrace the fact that his kingdom is found even in the ocean itself?
Yeah. I think as you say that, what comes to mind, and it's really something that I've learned about myself, is my need for certainty. And how that sometimes, when I picture what you just said, the waves going out and all that sort of like, there's a little bit of uncertainty in this, and Jesus is that like, he's not sometimes giving me the this is a certain thing, but I'll be with you and you'll be okay in the midst of it. And we said it, but it's really starting to, again, I'll go back to what I said, like embracing the bit of the mystery.
Yeah,
that comes to, but is to understand that sometimes, like for me anyway, it's something is that I need to be okay with the presence of Jesus in the midst of uncertainty. Not tidy categories.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to end it.
What's that?
I think that's a good place to end it.
All right.
So thanks everybody. We are going to be back on YouTube next week for another edition of Hi-Fi Seminary.
And go listen to this when you leave. Just turn your windows down, blast it really loud.
This is upside down. That's the right way.
Just for clarity.
It all looks the same to me.